It's before 4 o'clock right now. A recent custody battle over a pet has been raising questions about animal ownership in Canada. A Newfoundland man was recently awarded full custody of the dog after splitting up with his girlfriend. The province's top court did not rule that he was the better or the more affectionate owner, but emphasized the fact that he paid for the dog. Well, for her thoughts on this case and the distinctions between pets and property, we are joined by Victoria Shroff. She is a lawyer and adjunct law professor at the University of British Columbia. Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you walk us through the legal aspects of pet ownership here in Canada?
Yep, it's actually fairly straightforward. Whereas most people in Canada would think that their pet is part of the family and the law would generally recognize that, the law actually says that pets are property. What this means is that a court will make its decision about who gets to keep the family pet after separation based on who owns an animal rather than a custody formulation.
Well, are there any ways that two people can jointly own a pet?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, people could adopt a pet together and they could make it very clear in a separate agreement that this is how things are going to go upon dissolution, and I think that's a really good idea, so that you have your expectations and rights spelled out at the beginning rather than at the end when you can't stand your partner.
Well, it's interesting what you say, as some people do consider their pets our family. So it's interesting. Why do you think it is that legally they are still considered in the same category as a car would be or a piece of furniture?
Right. Well, the thing is that I think our laws are usually fairly far behind societal expectations. Our laws started off with us all living in an agrarian society. Pets were property then, and we didn't even have pets. They were just animals outside. We're in a property paradigm, if you pardon the jargon, and I think until we move away from there and have changes made in the legislature, then we will start to see changes where we actually start to recognize the intrinsic worth of animals, because otherwise pets will just remain as property or chattels in court as well.
So you think it's got to change so that things like emotional attachment and personal bonds are taken into consideration?
And it can. As the dissent in the recent March 2018 court in Baker and Armenia at the Court of Appeal in Newfoundland just showed us, the dissenting judge said, quote, the ownership of a dog is a more complex and nuanced question than the ownership of, say, a bicycle, unquote. She's speaking directly to the idea that, of course, we all think animals are animate. I don't think there's any question that a judge is saying they're not animate, but this is how the property laws work, and they are just there to apply the law.
Well, what about differences between a house pet, your family dog, versus perhaps you're on a farm? You could be referring to livestock. Any distinctions there around custody when people break up?
Well, not really. Again, you're talking about ownership. You're talking about property. I will say, however, that I think that a family pet is definitely treated a lot better under the law and by people, especially when you're talking about factory farming, where animals don't get to see the sky or sit up properly or stand properly in a pen. Again, the law will look at it as an ownership issue, but in terms of cruelty, I think they'd be looked at also differently.
But are there any circumstances where emotions do factor in?
Yes. So sometimes a court can actually apply a best interest test, but this is not to be confused with the best interest of a child test. And the courts make that very clear. But in those cases, some judges, depending, will look at the emotional bond between the person and the pet and the fact that the pet is sentient. So questions like who cared for the pet, who paid the vet bills, who walked the dog, who fed the dog. And then they might even say, does either party have a history of abuse to animals? But we have to say courts are constricted because animals are property under the law.
Well, it's interesting. You opened up the question about the potential for abuse. What about when negligence or cruelty enters into it?
Right. Well, I think that if that were brought to the court's attention, I would think that the judge is going to say, no, so this pet is not going to that person, to the abuser. I think that would be quite easy for a judge to hang his or her hat on and say, so I cannot release an animal into this household, regardless of ownership in that case. Because that's when, for example, the SPCA can come in and they will get ownership of an animal.
So what are the options? Dispute resolutions, or that couples who do split. What are their options in situations like this?
I suggest that parties might want to settle out of court. Go and meet with an animal law lawyer and try and have something drafted that take into account the best interests of the animal, because that's the best way to get across how you want things to go. If you've brokered a settlement with somebody, or mediation, that's another option. And you can do a customized, mutually agreed upon solution for your pet.
Have you ever experienced anything like this personally? I mean, do you have a pet yourself?
Yes, I have, and I've been doing animal law since 2000, so I've almost been practicing for 20 years, so I have definitely seen custody cases. I've seen them for same-sex couples. I've seen them for roommates. Anytime two people live together and they have an interest in an animal, you could call it a custody case.
Well, so do you expect to see changes in the near future?
I hope to, and I think that we're moving toward that. You can see adjudicators in Halifax have been saying things like, in a more perfect world, there would be special laws recognizing pets as living, feeling creatures with rights to be looked after, those who best meet their needs. We can see in the states, for example, statutes like the Alaska statute where divorce courts will now treat pets more like children, not just property. So it's available to us to be able to look at these examples and say, well, maybe this is where we should be going.
Well, I'm imagining the people listening right now holding their pets just a little bit closer today. Interesting topic. Victoria, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Victoria Shroff is a lawyer and adjunct professor at the University of British Columbia. It's 11 minutes before 4 o'clock. And Lisa, I know you're a pet person. So your pet, as much as you love your dogs and as much as they love you,
right?
I mean, they're just a piece of property in the eyes of the law.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. You walk them, you feed them, you cuddle them.
Uncomfortable. I have 3. I don't know what I would do. Yeah. All 3 of them. Very special.
You don't have to worry about it.
I don't have to worry about it.
But it is interesting. I think that's going to be really surprising to a lot of people, just how, how black and white the law is right now.
Yeah, well, you got to do something. You can go rescue another pet.
That's right. You're good at that.
I'm good at that, yeah.
There's lots of pets that would love a good home out there.
So many.
That is awesome. Okay, not a bad